Star Wars Rebels. I've said over and over again that I was sweating bullets for this review. Now that I'm actually doing it, I'm sweating a black hole. I've been extremely critical of Dave Filoni. That's an understatement. Dave Filoni is someone I've grown to really hate. He's a more clever version of J.J. Abrams, essentially. J.J. Abrams is clearly talentless, but Dave Filoni takes advantage of the casual fan to convince them he knows his shit. Apparently, Filoni had some involvement with Avatar: The Last Airbender, but he wasn't a top dog on that show. It should be pretty common knowledge by now that Filoni had no care for the expanded universe because he didn't want to write with all those pesky rules, pre-existing stories, and continuity of other writers. Basically, he wanted to write in a shared, connected universe without any responsibility. Basically, he wanted power without responsibility. And that's just not how it works. Uncle Ben made that clear. I've gone through the entirety of the Clone Wars. The original end of the show was Season 6, and during that gap between Season 6 and 7, Filoni got to work on writing a new show. One pivotal to Disney's canon. I mean, to be honest, everything Filoni makes is pivotal because he just bulldozes over everything he doesn't agree with. But point is, there was an illusion back then that all content would be made equal. 11 years later, Disney canon is such a mess. And for both the original canon and Disney's, it's all Filoni's fault. And whoever gave him the go-ahead to retcon whatever he wanted. Star Wars Rebels was made through that illusion though. So there was a lot of bad takes made about Star Wars Rebels. We've got the obvious ones, like the theory that Ezra Bridger was Rey's father, or that Ezra was Supreme Leader Snoke, or other crap regarding theories between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. God, that was embarrassing. When I first heard about Star Wars Rebels, it looked like a shitty kiddie show that would air on Disney XD and give us a simplistic, dumbed-down version of the Clone Wars, and I already don't like the Clone Wars. So seeing an even more simplified version of that is concerning. In fact, looking at the characters based on looks alone, I could already tell the tropes they were meant to embody. Kanan is the mentor, Hera is the pilot, Chopper is the pet, Zeb is the dumb brute, Ezra is the young protagonist, and Sabine is the cool girl. My god, I can read this show by cover alone. They're all generic TV show stereotypes. This is pretty much the same problem the Sad Batch had, and oh boy, we'll get to that show. Don't you worry. But on the other hand, this show is going to get a rare compliment I hardly give to anything else Disney puts out. Visually, this show actually looks like Star Wars. In something like The Last Jedi, the designs were so ugly and out of place, and I forgot half the time that I was watching a Star Wars movie. In Star Wars Rebels, sure it might be stylized, but it actually looks like Star Wars. The art style of Rebels closely adhered to the original drawings of Ralph McQuarrie, the concept artist for Star Wars A New Hope. As such, adhering closely to that while making a show based on the original trilogy was a good move. I'm surprised the sequel trilogy didn't try that. Being a rip-off of the originals after all. Nah, just make new fugly designs that don't even resemble Star Wars in the slightest, aside from shit like the Resistance and the First Order. Those movies were so backwards in every degree. It's not easy to describe what looks like Star Wars, or whether or not X story is on the right track, but I can say the sequels weren't. You know, just because it's detached doesn't mean it doesn't look like Star Wars. I can say that Tales of the Jedi, the original version, is still recognizable as Star Wars, for example, but it's also got an ancient Egyptian vibe to it. Now, with all of that being said, are you ready to get into Rebels? I think before I talk about the actual pilot, I should talk about the shorts that actually came out in the weeks before the show actually premiered on Disney XD. So first, let's talk about the 4 shorts in order of release. I have no idea what the chronology of these shorts are, but the sooner we get to them, the sooner we can talk about the actual meat of the show. The shorts are all some dumb short story concerning the main characters. Let's go through all of them. The first one is called The Machine and the Ghost. This short showcases 3 characters mainly. There's Hera, the pilot, there's Kanan, the leader, voiced by one Freddie Prinze Jr. You know him. He was in the live-action Scooby-Doo movies.
No! Look, I'm a man of substance. Dorky chicks like you turn me on too.
Yeah, it's safe to say that this guy had some embarrassing roles. I actually rewatched the live-action movie just because I knew Freddie Prinze Jr. was in it. So with that being said, we're in a space battle with minimal context. The short's description on Disney Plus describes all you need to know. TIE fighters attack the Ghost, and Hera and Kanan give the droid Chopper conflicting orders, and then they destroy the TIE fighters. The end. The only kind of subtle thing in the early series is the relationship between Hera and Kanan. Hera opts to call Kanan love, which basically indicates that they're romantic partners, but I can say that it isn't thrown in your face. I say this because subtlety is not the show's strong suit. The second short is all about Sabine, the overpowered Mary Sue. Dave Filoni seems to write a lot of Mary Sues, doesn't he? To be fair though, the stormtroopers in this show are so stupid, it's easy for Sabine to outwit. I say this because Sabine is meant to cause a diversion and ends up wasting time with stormtroopers. She starts spray painting and the stormtroopers always miss. You know, something about how the stormtrooper helmets are designed gives some sort of cutesy and harmless sort of vibe. That's why I'm never threatened by stormtroopers ever in this entire show. They're just video game fodder enemies. The stormtroopers have so many opportunities to apprehend her, and they miss it every single time, and each time, Sabine taunts them. It's bullshit. Short 3 has much of the same problems, except it's with the dumb brute, Zeb. Zeb is meant to meet Kanan at a certain alley, and he decides to cause some trouble for the Imperials, and he easily overpowers the Imperials. And Kanan even makes a remark that he's embarrassing the Imperials. Intimidating villains, right? Believe me, this is only the tip of the iceberg. We're at 3 out of 4 shorts, and they all concern making the Empire look like a joke. By the time Zeb has achieved a 6-star wanted level with the Empire, he isn't even breaking a sweat. Then we've got the final short, Property of Ezra Bridger, in which Ezra, still a loner, approaches a crashed TIE fighter, where he confronts the surviving pilot. The pilot is needlessly rude and antagonizes Ezra. Ezra easily steals shit from him before taking his helmet, in which the pilot tries to kill him with the still operational turret. Somehow Ezra dodges the blast, and then knocks the Imperial out with his self-made slingshot, I presume. Maybe it's not fair that I talk about dumb shorts meant to promote the show, but they all set the tone for the, at the time, upcoming show. The shorts are just as stupid as the show, but at least I talked about them so that people don't ask me questions about what I thought about them, because that's what I think about them. They're dumb as shit. Anyways, with that being said, now we can move on to the actual show. And man, do I have a lot to say about the first episode alone. Technically it's a two-parter, but the way I saw the episode was actually in a movie theater. One of my mum's friends won a ticket to see the two-parter in the cinemas. And so I went with my brothers and my mum, and we watched the 40-minute pilot on the big screen. I'd say it was a decent experience the first time. On top of that, around 2015 or so, I was on a plane flight to the United States for a holiday. And the only Star Wars thing they had on this flight was that very episode of Star Wars Rebels. So I watched it at least 10 times on a long-ass flight. I think we were flying for around 14 to 17 hours, if my memory serves me correctly. So yeah, I've seen this pilot countless times. Only question though, is what do I think about it? Unsurprisingly, it hasn't aged well. I should have spoken about this when talking about the shorts, but they heavily downscaled the quality of the animation from the Clone Wars Season 6 to Rebels. Them cutting corners resulted in this. I doubt it was Filoni's decision to make everything look worse, but hey, I'm still criticizing it, because you'd expect a good transition. Also, things don't perfectly line up between the Clone Wars and Rebels, in terms of looks. I'm saying this because when you're making a sequel series to the Clone Wars, shouldn't there be consistency? Anyways, let's talk about the first scene. To be honest, I don't know why they included this first scene. In the structure of the whole show, having the Grand Inquisitor make his appearance in the flesh early just kinda ruins it. I know this because when I walked into the theater all those years ago, the scene it started with was our introduction of Ezra Bridger, and the first scene was entirely absent. and to be honest, the episode flowed way better to when I saw it with the Inquisitor and Vader talking. I just felt like the Grand Inquisitor's introduction would have served the story if it came later in the show's presentation, like at the end of this two-parter. Well, anyways, Vader, voiced by the now old-ass James Earl Jones, tells the Grand Inquisitor to stop Force-sensitive children from becoming Jedi. The Grand Inquisitor obeys Vader, and that's the start of this episode. Again, this scene doesn't serve a true purpose in starting the story. Plus, I felt it ruined any kind of build-up we could have had with the Grand Inquisitor. Anyways, we cut to a tower on the planet Lothal, with Ezra Bridger, our main character, minding his own business on the balcony. And then, of course, we see an Imperial Star Destroyer above, approaching the city. Then, of course, the inappropriate main credits with the upbeat theme. I criticized the Clone Wars for having an inappropriate credits roll. I'm criticizing Rebels for an inappropriate main title. Anyways, the plot starts with some fruit vendor being hassled by Imperials. Really? A fruit vendor? Is that the best you guys could come up with? Yeah. These guys are bothering a fruit vendor because he's selling fruit. There's these two recurring Imperials who can basically be identified as fatty and skinny. Skinny tells the vendor that all trade must be registered with the Empire. Then, of course, the vendor, instead of just doing that, decides to talk back to these guys, going on a rant about how the Empire has ruined everything. Skinny then pulls out a communicator to have the vendor arrested for treason. So basically, the Empire is bothering a guy just because he's selling fruit, and the guy is being arrested for talking back to the Imperials. You might say that this is an insignificant moment, but it really shows you how bad Filoni and friends are at making the Empire the bad guys. Because who the hell would care about a fruit vendor? I don't even know why this guy is being questioned. As someone who's watched this part a lot of times, I think this guy should know not to antagonize the Empire. Then, of course, as the vendor's being arrested, Ezra asks Fatty to spare a Yogan. And when he's brushed off, he steals Skinny's communicator. He then fakes being an Imperial by talking on Skinny's communicator, saying it's a code red emergency. The Imperials immediately decide to unarrest the vendor, so of course the vendor thanks Ezra when he shows up again, and Ezra takes his fruit and does some Assassin's Creed climbing in the shortest amount of time. So yeah, this is one of the first scenes, and there's already so many problems. The lazy and poorly written ways the Empire is made evil, and in the next scene, they give the impression that the Empire are so easy to embarrass. If the shorts weren't enough, Ezra watches the clueless Imperials as they find out the code red emergency was a ruse, and Ezra chuckles. This kid doesn't worry about what will happen to him if he's caught, and given what's revealed in a later episode, that's a problem. The Empire, based on first impressions, are just a bunch of buffoons to be gunned down without a care in the world. So yeah, the villains in the show suck. They are unintimidating, unimposing, and evil because they're evil. Shallow as shit, and it's not like they even made the show hateable enough. They're just idiots to be thwarted by the good guys. Anyways, Ezra feels the presence of the Force or something, and it directs him towards Kanan Jarrus and the Ghost Crew. He observes Kanan, Zeb, and Sabine doing signals to each other. Sabine in particular walks past one of the speeders and throws a grenade on it, blowing it up and causing chaos. The escorts Kanan and friends decided to attack her carrying crates of something unknown at this point. So basically Kanan and the rebels easily take out the Imperials, which makes the Empire look pathetic, because these guys are not sweating in the slightest. Seriously, I've said this so much about Filoni shows, but this feels like a video game. And I wonder why Filoni just doesn't become a game designer instead of a showrunner. He'd probably be better at that, because his shows are pretty lackluster. Anyways, Ezra comes in to steal one of the speeders with the crates. He dodges a punch from Zeb and smugly thanks the two of them for the opening. This all leads to a speeder chase, in which we make the Empire look like even more of a joke. Sabine literally encourages Ezra to keep going for some reason, despite the fact they need to get paid for those crates. There's this one part where Kanan throws a grenade at the stormtrooper, like a game of hot potato. Ugh. At this point, I really start to notice how downscaled the animation is. It's no wonder no one likes the animation in this show. It's got less effort and a fraction of the budget put in. At least something I complained about in the Clone Wars mostly won't apply here. that being continuity errors. Since this is the very start of a rebooted Disney canon, Filoni actually had the freedom to make shit up as he went along. Although if there's a continuity error with the films, I'll point it out. But on the animation, the movement feels like an early 2000s video game. Like, seriously, I was playing Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy, and noticed that the movement's got many of the same motifs. Obviously, Rebels has more unique animations, but it feels exactly like a straight-to-DVD 3D animated movie. For example, there's a shitty animated film called Space Chimps 2. The first one was painfully mediocre, but the second one has been critically panned across the board from anyone who reviewed it. Space Chimps 2 is literally one of the worst animated films ever without exaggeration. Star Wars Rebels was barely better than the movie I'm using as an example, and that's where you know we've reached a low bar. Seriously, how much was the budget cut back? Well, I just looked it up. In terms of animation and nothing else, the average budget for the Clone Wars was around $1 million, while Rebels was half of that on average. Gee, Rebels really had some bad circumstances, didn't it? Lower production values is my criticism here. Anyways, Ezra is cornered by Kanan. They have a brief argument on who the crates belong to, until Ezra outwits Kanan by evading a TIE fighter, in which Kanan's speeder gets blown up. Ezra then tells Kanan to, quote, "have a good one," which, to be honest, is not a very Star Warsian thing to say. Like, what I mean is that while a lot of the dialogue in the movies may derive from the real world, some phrases and expressions feel too much like the real world. That's why Star Wars has always used fictional curse words. To bring up Jedi Outcast and Academy again, two I remember from those games are Sparst and Sith spit, and it worked just fine. Until we got Andor, which was made by people who clearly didn't know their Star Wars, and took me out of what is supposed to be the Star Wars universe. Anyways, Kanan has this smug look on him that reminds me of the Chris Griffin Vapor douchebag image that I commonly use for my crappy argument series. Ezra speeds across the plains with a TIE fighter pursuing him. Just as he's about to die, the ghost shows up to save him. Kanan offers him a ride to save his life, and impressively, Ezra manages to use the crate's floaty anti-gravity to get on, in which he's got his ride. Zeb in particular opens the crate to find a bunch of E11 blaster rifles. After playing so many Star Wars video games, I thought, wow, you were really after that? A flimsy, lower damage weapon. Yeah, I know that the video games tend to shift canon, but seriously, were these crappy blasters the best you could come up with? So yeah, I was left unimpressed by what the supply of crates ended up being, and I think they should have just come up with something cooler. But that's a small gripe if we're being honest. Kanan tells Zeb and Sabine to keep watch on Ezra while he goes up. As such, Ezra is arguing with Zeb. We get reintroduced to Hera, who questions Kanan on why the operation was so rocky this time. Kanan is reluctant to admit that some 14-year-old boy was the reason. And of course, Hera is surprised but impressed. I can say at the very least that the attitude towards Ezra amongst the Ghost crew remains the same. So that's character consistency, but whether it'll stay a thing in future episodes and seasons remains to be seen. We've also got this part where Zeb falls on Ezra, and Ezra tells him to get off because he can't breathe. But it ain't because of the weight, it's because of the smell. Sounds like a cliche joke, doesn't it? Well, you haven't heard the worst of it. Zeb proceeds to throw Ezra into a room, but he shortly after climbs through the vents. He falls out of the vents and is super excited that he's in space, before he panics from the TIE fighters attacking the ship. Also, Sabine shows up, throws him off the gunner chair, then predictably, Sabine takes off her helmet, and Ezra is immediately infatuated. I fucking knew that Ezra would have the hots for Sabine when I first heard about the show and its characters. Sabine, just like Ahsoka, was an underage fetish Mary Sue to fuel Filoni's lust, but that's an extended discussion for later. Ezra, because he's in a trance, walks up to Sabine and talks to her in the most cartoony, charmy voice I've ever heard.
My name's Ezra. What's yours?
My name's Zeb, you love rat.
Okay, to be honest, that joke kind of landed. Zeb cutting in was a good punchline. Not a great punchline, but still, it worked. With that being said, the Ghost jumps into hyperspace, and that's the first quarter of this two-parter. Anyways, we cut over to what the Empire is doing. A dude from the ISB, I think, named Agent Callus tells Skinny that he's not the first one to be attacked by the Ghost crew. We have that cliche joke where a guy says something and then bails out of it because it wasn't the right thing to say. Agent Callus then goes on a monologue about the spark of rebellion and how it must be snuffed out before it catches fire. We cut back to Zeb dragging Ezra to the cockpit where Hera is. Ezra wants to be taken back to Lothal, and Hera tells them that they're going to do exactly that. Ezra is baffled since they just left Lothal with the Imperials chasing them, but Hera explains that the Ghost can change its signature, and that's why they won't recognize them when they return. I found this explanation extremely iffy. Where in the hell is that a thing? This just makes it an easy way to return to Lothal whenever the hell they feel like it. This feels exactly like a video game. You commit a crime, you escape, you never have to worry about it again. Except in Red Dead Redemption, maybe. Ezra wants the Ghost crew to take the blasters outside Capital City, but they obviously refuse. This is where we're introduced to this area. When asked, Zeb and Sabine explain its nickname Tarkin Town because Tarkin is the asshole who kicked the farmers off their land, and Sob Story 101. The music here actually kinda helps with the presentation, so I'll give it that. Kanan and Hera give the blasters to some Deveronian named Vizago. It's shown that Vizago pays them to steal shit from the Empire and gives them intel. In particular, Vizago gives them intel on the Wookiees, something they really wanted to know about. We also get this moment that is pretty much supposed to represent how Ezra isn't a selfless hero, as when Sabine and Zeb give out free fruit to the Tarkin Town residents and gets thanked for it, Ezra says to himself that he didn't do anything. Is this an effective moment to start Ezra's arc? Not really. It just leads Ezra back to the ship where he thinks about whatever, and he gets a hum or whatever from the Force. It leads him into the ship and into a random room. He uses an electronic lockpick to slice through the door, and is drawn to a certain cabinet under a bunk bed. He finds a holocron, and on top of that, a Jedi signature weapon, a lightsaber. To be honest, this part isn't actually too bad. The Force ambience is pretty good, and I can buy Ezra having a certain calling from the Force. I just have to wonder if the will of the Force even exists in Disney canon though. Disney changed so much of the established rules, and it's inexcusable. The Force and its purpose seems really directionless at that. So anyways, with Ezra discovering the lightsaber, he gets really excited, and starts playing around with it, until the door opens and he's confronted by Kanan, Hera, and the droid Chopper. If you're going into the show with absolutely no prior knowledge, you'll realize that Kanan is a Jedi. The revelation coming full circle we'll talk about later, but this is the setup. Ezra tells Kanan he felt like there was this thing that wanted him to take it, and of course, Kanan doesn't believe him or care, and tells him to give back the lightsaber. Ezra then responds, "Isn't that the weapon of the Jedi?" But Kanan repeats himself and Ezra gives up the lightsaber, although he keeps the holocron behind Kanan's back. I wonder here why Kanan didn't just ask for the holocron too. The thing was written so Ezra would use the holocron later, but I have to wonder why he didn't ask for it, given it was in the same place as the lightsaber. With that, Ezra goes into the kitchen or whatever, where he meets Sabine again. Ezra discusses who she and the others are exactly. Sabine responds that basically they're a family. Insert Fast and Furious joke here. Zeb comes in, telling Sabine to go into a little family meeting they're having, and Chopper will watch Ezra. I never really had any particular thoughts on this moment. Ezra, as shown earlier, has taken a liking to Sabine, but Sabine is clearly not interested, or is at best amused with Ezra's antics. But that's pretty much the most she likes about him. I really would not care if the two ended up together. Will that change later on? I doubt it, but who knows. In a little family meeting, Kanan discusses freeing a transport of Wookiee prisoners. Everyone on the ship feels they owe them because the Wookiees helped my people, blah blah. The episode doesn't quite explain why the crew care about freeing the Wookiees. Is it because it's easy life debts or something? If that's the case, that reminds me of what Scorch said in Republic Commando, where he remarks that helping the Wookiees means life debts for everyone who helps them. Why did you guys become so interested in Wookiees exactly? because the most we have to go off of is the fact that the Wookiees helped ex-crew members' people. The meaning is interrupted by Ezra, who was spying on them. When caught, he tries to climb back into the vents, but Zeb grabs him and throws him to the ground. That's where Hera opts to be the one who keeps watch on Ezra. So anyways, the crew's mission is to free some Wookiee prisoners from a prison transport. After a brief discussion about why the Ghost crew thumbed their fingers up the Empire's arse, Hera speaks to the prison transport captain or whatever. She lies that they got an additional Wookiee slave and that they were already paid by Governor Tarkin. And of course they're given permission to dock. Given this is revealed to be you-know-what in a few minutes, the Ghost crew boards the transport. There's this stupid attempted joke where Zeb poses as a Wookiee. I'd like to point out that Steve Blum is way overused in this show. He voices Zeb, but he also seems to voice every stormtrooper ever. When it comes to Steve Blum, he's hit or miss depending on what he's in. He excels at Transformers, for example, but I fucking hate him in Star Wars Rebels. If there was ever a candidate for the worst voice actor in this show, Steve Blum would be the first nomination. Whoever's fault it is for getting Blum to record at least 10% of the dialogue for the whole show also deserves scorn as well. Why I'm complaining about this now is because there's a stormtrooper, obviously voiced by Steve Blum, remarking how Steve Blum's character Zeb is obviously not a Wookiee. Kanan lies that it's a rare hairless Wookiee, and Zeb does a fake imitation of a Wookiee in a pathetic attempt at humor, until Zeb just opts to punch the two unlucky stormtroopers. They opt to infiltrate the prison transport, in which the whole thing is quiet. Hera also realizes the signal's jammed, and then a motherfucking Star Destroyer shows up. Yeah, that's right. The whole thing was a trap. Took the Empire some time to counteract the rebels, because before then, they were just sitting on their fat ass. With that being said, Hera tries to get Ezra to warn the others. Ezra is extremely reluctant to go help who he sees as a bunch of strangers, and the two have a lengthy argument about it, wasting time. Ezra eventually loses out and goes to warn the Ghost crew about the trap. So he runs over and warns Kanan and Zeb just before the stormtroopers come through. We then learn that Ezra actually has a fucking weapon. These gimmicky slingshot things that look like merchandise Disney would sell based on the show. Seriously, when it comes to equipment the characters use, it's all one big advertisement. Sabine causes the whole ship to be anti-gravity, so the characters float around. This serves no purpose, aside from seeing the characters float around. Then the gravity comes back on, and while running to the ghost ship, Zeb pushes Ezra back, which causes Agent Kallus to grab Ezra. And so what does Zeb do? He leaves him behind with the Imperials. Yep, that just happened. Ezra got captured. And since this is the second episode, the upbeat Rebels intro plays. What a way to take me out of the moment. Anyways, barely seconds later, the ghost detaches itself, and seconds after that, Sabine blows the charges on the ship and it explodes. The sense of time gives the impression that Ezra or Agent Kallus would have had barely enough time to get off the smaller ship before it blew up. And even if they did, they definitely would have been damn close to the explosion and died anyways. So realistically, they're both fucking dead, but they're not because plot explosion resistant armor. Maybe what I just said is nitpicking, but watching the episode, the sense of time is extremely short. With the ghost making a successful jump to hyperspace, they all talk about how Ezra did quite alright in preventing the trap. The way it's presented, Zeb conveniently walks in keeping quiet. Everyone else asks Zeb where Ezra is, but Zeb deflects the question, but he's caught on to right away. He spills the beans that Ezra got grabbed by the ISB agent. Everyone in the room is like, what in the hell is wrong with you? But Zeb is like, bah, we were gonna drop him off anyways, we save fuel. And reasoning that they'll go easy on him. Anyways, we cut to Agent Kallus walking into Ezra's cell on the Star Destroyer. He introduces himself and is like,
You are?
Jabba the Hutt.
Gee, that's one of the few times a joke actually lands. Anyways, Kallus tells him that he's gonna be used as bait when the ghost crew comes back for him. Ezra, of course, is like,
You seriously think, wow, you're about as bright as a binary droid. They're not gonna come for me. People don't do that.
Kallus then closes the conversation by getting the troopers to search him. And of course, they grab his stuff. But since they didn't pat him down, the one thing they didn't take is the holocron. I don't know why Ezra was holding onto this object specifically, but whatever. He is unsuccessful in opening it. So what does he do? He meditates, and unconsciously uses the Force to open the holocron. Now, unconscious Force use is definitely plausible. In the Darth Bane trilogy, for example, both Bane and Xana did this before they were properly trained. I can say at the very least, at least in the first 2 episodes, that Ezra's Force use is believable, and didn't just come from believing in the Force, which is what J.J. Abrams did with Rey. Well, anyways, you get a snippet of what's in the holocron, which is basically Obi-Wan's message he made at the Jedi Temple in Revenge of the Sith. It is actually nice to know what exactly he said in his message, so that's a nice bit of additional context. Then we cut back to the Ghost in hyperspace. They skipped over a lot of dialogue debating whether or not to go back for Ezra. Zeb and Sabine disagree, but Hera and Chopper agree to go back, leaving the final vote up to Kanan. Now, since the Empire are fully prepared for the Ghost crew this time, there's no way they'll be caught off guard, right? The scene we get after that is Ezra yelling out in his cell that the Emperor is his uncle and starts fake coughing. Instead of ignoring him, the stormtroopers get concerned and open the cell, in which Ezra takes the opportunity to escape. Pretty lazy writing, huh? Ezra takes a helmet just sitting there in a storage space, and he doesn't even need to type in a code or anything. The helmet just works for him. Gee, whoever wrote this clearly does not remember A New Hope very well, where Luke couldn't see it all in his helmet. Mostly because the helmet was turned off, and it couldn't be turned back on without a code. So it's comical that Ezra can just grab one and use it no problem. To top that up, Ezra listens to Imperial comms and learns that the Ghost crew slipped by undetected somehow. Yeah, they just talk about how the Ghost crew just arrived in the Star Destroyer, telling rather than showing. So yeah, that's a second case of lazy writing right there. Ezra is even able to use the comms himself to report that the Ghost crew is in the upper hangar to detract the amount of troopers they'll have to face. Anyways, the Ghost crew lands and make their way across the ship. The Ghost crew don't have to make it far into the ship because Ezra drops down just outside the hangar and Zeb punches him because he's wearing a helmet. Then of course, with the minimal search for Ezra, they all run back to the hangar, which is only 12 meters away. Do you see what I mean? This whole bit is rushed. The Ghost crew with Ezra easily escape because of explosive graffiti that Sabine sprayed. That blows open the hangar door and causes Kallus and the boys to be almost sucked out. In fact, some of them do get sucked out into space. Anyways, Ezra is about to be taken home when he mentions the location of the enslaved Wookiees. You see, the Imperials spilled that information when he was wearing that helmet that shouldn't have worked. Man, does the lazy writing top off on each other, doesn't it? Well, at least the Imperials know where the rebels are going, since they figure out that Ezra used the helmet, in which they discuss the details about Kessel. But if anything, that's a minor saving grace to the writing. So on their way to the Disney canon version of Kessel, we finally get to see the Wookiees, off to do some labor, when the Ghost crew shows up to save the day. Yeah, they didn't even have to go through any fleet orbiting the planet or anything. You'd think that if Kallus figured out that the rebels were going to Kessel, that he would have tried to alert Imperial forces where the rebels were going. It seems counterintuitive. Anyways, we've got a little child Wookiee in the group too, just to make you feel extra bad for the Wookiees. The rebels show up to cause chaos, with Ezra sneaking behind the stormtroopers somehow to break the chains of the Wookiees. Then, of course, this is where Kallus gets his cue to show up. I guess he only shows up a minute late, but I still have to question why he's only cutting in now, and why he didn't warn Imperial forces. Also, why the hell didn't the Star Destroyer show up? I'm very curious. Is that thing going for repairs or something? Who knows? Anyways, the child Wookiee runs off, only to be pursued by a stormtrooper. As Hera and Chopper gun down TIE fighters in the sky, Ezra and the others take cover behind some crates. Oh wow, they're actually getting pinned down? Wow, that's a first. These guys had such an easy time fighting the Empire throughout this entire 2-part episode. They didn't really sell the idea that they're being pinned down either, but for some reason, Kanan figures it's time to show the Imperials who he really is as a last resort or something. Again, they did a piss poor job at presenting it that way. And it's here where the show is actually able to get some points for once. Kanan jumps out of the crates, dodging blaster fire. He connects his metal parts and activates his lightsaber, and it's actually paced out well, with Ezra, the Wookiees, and the Stormtroopers surprised at what they're witnessing, to which Kallus, just as shocked as everyone else, orders those under him to focus their fire on the Jedi. And wow, I actually felt the chills. I'm actually invested for once. This show doesn't do that very often, just so you know. The setup with Ezra discovering Kanan's lightsaber was there, but Kanan deciding to reveal to the Empire that he's a Jedi was utter crap. It almost feels like Kanan was just taunting the Empire to hunt him down harder or something. But hey, I was actually invested in this one moment. What's next? Well, the ghost shows up to pick everyone up, and since Ezra feels heroic, he chases after the child Wookiee, who in turn is being chased by a random stormtrooper. He uses his slingshot gimmick to get the stormtrooper to fall over the railing. You know, that gimmick reminds me of Bart Simpson. What the hell's up with that?
Eat my fucking shorts!
The ghost picks up mostly everyone. Then, of course, we get the confrontation between Ezra and Kallus. He assumes that Ezra is Kanan's apprentice, and then Kanan shows up standing on top of the ghost, and Kallus tries to shoot him, and of course gets knocked over the railing. Ezra and the child Wookiee hitch a ride on the ghost, and fly off, victorious. Then we get one of my least favourite parts of the episode.
First Jedi you've ever seen, sir?
The villain kills his own men cliché. You know, Darth Vader set such a bad example for this much overused trope that there's very few times it's done without annoying the hell out of me. I think the problem I have with this is that the villains don't get anything out of killing their loyal goons, aside from maybe inspiring fear, but there's so many other better ways to do that than just turning on your goons when things don't go your way. You could at least say with Vader that he punished people who fucked up in severe ways, but here, this poor trooper told Kallus a joke while they're both hanging on for dear life, and Kallus proceeds to kick him off to his death. What an asshole. Seriously, is no one in the Empire held accountable for the lives of those under them? Won't Kallus need to write a report explaining why he fucked up and why nobody under him survived? And why the rebels and the Wookiees got away? I don't know. I tend to ask 50 questions whenever this does happen. It might not be plot relevant, but it's meant to showcase how iffy this trope is when it isn't done correctly. Two examples of it being done well in Star Wars specifically is firstly Revenge of the Sith, when Sidious orders Vader to kill the Separatists on Mustafar. It was a loose end to be tied up. Plus, Sidious could take the assets of these greedy businessmen and look like a hero for wiping these guys out. Another example is Tales of the Jedi. Not the Filoni Chinese knockoff version, but the actual Tales of the Jedis from the 90s, where Exar Kun and Ulaquel Droma lure the incompetent Credo and the traitorous Alima Keto into a suicide mission that will benefit both of them in their conquest against the Republic. That's what I mean. When it's done well, it comes across as the villain turning failures into victories, and not just them having a hissy fit where nothing gets accomplished. There's a reason why Exar Kun and Ulaquel Droma were my top 2 favourite characters in Tales of the Jedi. They were interesting, and they actually did stuff that made sense, both as Jedi and as Sith. Exar Kun in particular is one of my favourite Star Wars villains for a reason. Anyways, with that being said, the episode is pretty much in its wrapping up stage. The Ghost Crew and the Wookiees say goodbye, and Ezra can feel like a hero for once. So what's next? Well, Ezra is going to be dropped off now, but if you know anything about this show, you know that this won't last at all. So anyways, at the fake goodbye, Kanan asks for the holocron, and Ezra gives it to him before he runs off. having stolen his lightsaber. Hera comes out and points out how Ezra opened the holocron, so he's actually Force sensitive. So as Ezra's going back to the shithole tower he calls a home, Ezra asks Kanan behind him what the Force is. I don't remember the Force being mentioned by name prior to this point, but I'm just gonna presume Ezra heard it somewhere. Or maybe it was mentioned and I forgot about it. Anyways, Kanan gives the same explanation Obi-Wan did to Luke in A New Hope before telling him that the Force is strong with them. That's where Kanan offers Ezra the chance to come with them as a permanent member of the Ghost Crew, as well as learning to use the Force, and so on and so forth. We proceed to get a scene where we hear Obi-Wan's message to surviving Jedi, and it's actually pretty decent. It's just the narration with the Ghost Crew doing their own thing. It's good. Ezra comes back to give Kanan his lightsaber, and it's done without any dialogue. Then, to close the episode, we see Agent Kallus, who still has his job, tell the Grand Inquisitor about Kanan, in which the Grand Inquisitor thanks him for the call, and he does that typical bad guy thing, where he closes his eyes and then opens it in tune with sinister music. And that was the pilot. And would you look at the runtime, we've already spoken about a lot. You can see why this video took forever, but hey, at least we didn't have to talk about retcons in the EU this time, because they already rebooted the timeline. Problem is though, there's plenty of replacement problems to hold us over. It's like a whack-a-mole machine. Another problem just pops up. Let's recap. We've got a cartoony, shitty kiddie show that dumbs down the Star Wars universe, exploring the simplest of simplistic shit, lazy writing, gimmicky characters, etc. This show was made at the start of a new timeline, and Filoni was given free reign to do whatever he wanted, and he squandered it. Like seriously, who wastes an opportunity like that? Man, does Filoni frustrate me. So before I have a seizure, we should probably just talk about the next episode. This is going to be quite the adventure, won't it? Anyways, the next episode is called Droids in Distress, and it starts with another run-of-the-mill escape from TIE fighters. Despite the cliffhanger with the last episode, you can forget about seeing the Grand Inquisitor until episode 5. It reminds me about how they teased Bobby Fat, but then we had to wait for his fat ass to show up several episodes later. I still don't understand why Kanan revealed to the Empire that he was a Jedi, and what it serves for the story, if any Inquisitor isn't going to show up yet. After making the jump to hyperspace, Hera explains that they need to make money to keep the ship and its crew going. They certainly don't do a good job at selling the conflict though. None of the characters complain that they're hungry or that the food's almost expired. It's just a simple, oh yeah, we need food, drink, and fuel. Ezra smugly remarks that he'd like to learn some Jedi mind tricks, but Kanan hasn't taught him anything yet. Yeah. This came across like they're trying to delay the plot. That's another thing you're going to need to wait for. I'm waiting. Anyways, the crew decide to accept another one of Ezra'S jobs, and that includes stealing more weapons. So to steal the weapons, the Ghost Crew board a civilian transport ship, and it's here where we meet a background character from the first episode. Minister Maketh Tua. I didn't realize she worked for the Empire. And what the hell is that hat she's wearing? Well, anyways, Conehead is accompanied by an alien who cannot speak Basic. And so they're having communication problems, and this is where we're introduced to R2d2 and C3po. When I saw them on screen, I was like, oh fucking course. As I hear, this show milks guest appearances and cameos, and they're not done in a clever way. It just feels like quotas to be fulfilled. Filoni did this commonly in the Clone Wars too, but here, it gets really annoying. It's only revealed at the very end why 3PO and R2 are in this episode. So until then, you're just groaning at the bullshit fan service. This is the sort of stuff that makes Rebels feel like a shitty kiddie show. I also have to question why nobody seems to recognize the Ghost Crew as being fugitives from the Empire. They make being a rebel look so easy. Basically, shenanigans happen on the transport, with Sabine mistranslating the alien to get them away from the correct docking port, while the Ghost Crew will steal weapons for Vizago. They do this by luring 3PO and R2 away, with the rules that the droids aren't allowed to be in the main area on the transport. The rebels do it with such a smug look on their face. It's easy as pie to them, and that's what I fucking hate. There's also Ezra fighting with Chopper, but who really cares about that? Nobody, that's who. With the Minister lured to Bay 17, the Ghost crew work their way to get to Bay 7, the correct number. Ezra complains to Kanan how he hasn't been taught a thing, and Kanan dismisses him and tells him to get on with the job. Although Ezra's parkour skills are pretty impressive, it makes you wonder if he even needs the Force to do certain things. He's even able to land from a relative high spot, fall on his ass, and manage not to break any bones. It's almost like Ezra has got Super Mario powers. Anyways, he opens the door for the rest of the crew, and they find out what they're stealing. T7 ion disruptors. Zeb has this concerned look, and says these were the weapons used to genocide his people. The genocide of his people is only brought up like 2 or 3 times in the whole episode. Maybe it's explored in a future episode, but it's just a hammed-in thing to tell us that the Empire is evil. It's not even elaborated why Zeb's people were genocided, just that they were genocided, and Zeb is one of the last of his people. Too bad that I don't give a shit. I cared more about Anakin wiping out the Sand People than Zeb's people. Anyways, the Minister, along with the Stormtrooper escort, figure out what's going on and rushes over to Bay 7, where they were originally supposed to go, but not before Chopper tries to stall them and waste the Imperials' time. Of course, the Imperials run without destroying Chopper, which is convenient, and confront the rebels trying to steal the disruptors. Zeb puts his hands up and walks towards the Stormtroopers. The Stormtroopers have ample time to tell him to stop in his tracks, but they just aim their guns at him without firing, and this allows Zeb to get super close to whack them. Like, why are Stormtroopers made this stupid? They may be cannon fodder in video games, but at least they shoot you as soon as they see you. These troopers have many opportunities to kill the good guys, and they squander it every single time. I'm not even 5 episodes in, and I can read this show's formula like a fucking book. Also, R2 decides to follow Chopper on the ship, and 3PO is forced to follow them onto the Ghost. Despite these being Imperial droids, the Ghost crew don't do anything to them. I mean, they debate selling them to Vizago, but besides from that, they leave R2 and 3PO completely unsupervised. We see R2 clearly recording the Ghost crew's conversation, and nobody seems to notice. On top of that, 3PO sends a distress message to the Imperials, which is why there should have been someone keeping an eye on both of them. With this, Agent Kallus is able to track the Ghost crew with the help of 3PO, and it goes exactly how you expect. During the transaction with Vizago, he sees the Empire show up and leaves without paying the Ghost crew. Yeah, he just takes the weapons and flies away. Will we ever see him again? Fair. Who cares? We only knew this character for like 2 episodes briefly, and now he's out of the picture. A crappy end to a character we just met an episode or 2 ago. Anyways, the Empire shows up with no interest in helping 3PO, and basically this part focuses on a confrontation between Agent Kallus and Zeb. Kallus carries the same weapon Zeb carries, and explains that he was there during the genocide of the Lasats, Zeb's people. He killed a guardsman and took his weapon. This is meant to derive a personal confrontation between these two, but of course, it's left inconclusive. As I hear, a lot of stuff in the show doesn't get resolved until the show is at its very, very end. During the rest of the show, it seems to just be shitty adventures and fluff. The Ghost crew overload the disruptors to blow up the Imperials, again leaving Agent Kallus the only Imperial survivor for a second time. Yeah, the named bad guys have to live because we gotta save them for later. He's actually close to killing Zeb, but Ezra unexpectedly uses the Force unconsciously to force push Kallus. Now, him using the Force before he's learnt a thing is possible. For example, I cite Xana using the dark side, unknowingly to crush the Jedi who killed her bouncer friend. But I suppose the key difference here is that it was not personal enough for Ezra. Ezra would have known Zeb for a couple of days, and definitely would not have a strong enough attachment to him. When it comes to unconscious use of the Force without training, there has to be a strong enough Force is what I'm saying. And this moment probably shouldn't have been with Zeb, especially considering the episode that takes place right after this one. Anyways, the Ghost crew gets away again. This episode seems to recycle a bunch of stuff we saw in the episode before. Anyways, I suppose what progresses in the plot is Ezra's Jedi training starting tomorrow, as Kanan deems him worthy now. and the Ghost Crew delivers the droid back to Bail Organa, who I suppose lent them to the Minister. And it's here where we see R2 was recording the Ghost Crew. You can very clearly tell that Bail is working for rebels to recruit for the rebellion. Yeah, focusing on the origins of the Galactic Civil War on a broader scale would have made for a more interesting show, wouldn't it? I wonder why they changed that up when making a sequel to the Clone Wars. Well, at least this episode progresses the overall story a little bit, but as for the next episode, nada. This is a straight up filler episode, with enough substance to fill a Twinkie. It's not even like they came up with a cool idea. You want to know what happens in this episode? Do you? Well, let me tell you. Ezra and Zeb are arguing with each other and fighting. Apparently the bunk bed falls on Zeb, and Zeb thinks Ezra pulled a prank on him. But it's revealed while Ezra's being chased that it was actually Chopper. You dick. I said how I like droids in the Clone Wars, and that they were one of the highlights. In this show, I'm starting to think I can't even say that as a redeeming factor. 3PO and R2 in the last episode was just meh in quality, and Chopper I'm starting to hate. Granted, I don't like any of the other characters, but Chopper seems to be like the worst one. As for the other characters, they all seem to be unlikable too. Sabine in particular seems to just be another Mary Sue. She's like what? 15? 16? People joke about Ezra being Aladdin, and if he's Aladdin, he cannot be the Disney version of him. No, he's the Aladdin from the original story of 1001 Arabian Nights. Because in that story, Aladdin was a total loser, and his father died from disappointment from his son being such a loser, to hammer home the point. Zeb is just the grumpy tough brute. The only ones I kind of don't hate are Kanan somewhat and Hera, especially Hera. Hera hasn't placed a bad mark on me, at least yet. Anyways, Hera forces Ezra and Zeb out on a supply run to go get some fruit from a local town on Lothal, and they aren't allowed back without at least acquiring one mail run fruit. Kanan even asks Hera how they're supposed to get said fruit when they go out. Is Hera supposed to be sending them out so they'll bond with each other? I don't know. If that's the case, I suppose that's what prevents me from hating Hera. During the trip to the market, Ezra meets a dude that he knows, Mr. Sumar, who is a marketplace fruit vendor. Ezra, despite being a lone wolf, knows this guy enough to be on a friendly enough basis with him. I suppose Ezra would need a few people to socialize with on Lothal, I suppose. Anyways, we also see that the Empire is pressuring Mr. Sumar into selling his farm, which he refuses to do. After looking around, Zeb gets Ezra to carry some stuff while he looks for that damn fruit they're supposed to get. They manage to find a crate of it, but it's already been sold to the Empire. So what are they gonna do? Well, they hide behind some supply crates, and Ezra uses the Force to open up the supply crate, but of course, that doesn't go anywhere. So Ezra decides to steal the fruit directly from the Imperials. Ezra throws a pebble, just like a distraction in a video game, which reinforces my point that Dave Filoni should have a change in careers. Anyhow, Ezra tries to grab a fruit, but he's unsurprisingly spotted, and Zeb throws the crates he hid behind at the Imperials, and shenanigans ensue. Ezra and Zeb opt to run away with the Imperials chasing them. Ezra climbs onto the rooftops, and as well as that, Zeb takes control of a TIE fighter, and somehow completely figures out how to pilot the thing. He manages to do it without screwing up once. So yeah, it makes the whole thing look super easy. This show pretty much establishes that the Empire is incompetent and can be easily thwarted by the good guys. We even get that trope where Zeb forces Ezra to admit that they're even in order to save his life. I also hate how the Imperials are such bad shots. It should be time to break that stereotype. But instead, Filoni and friends indulge that trope. So pretty much, the only noteworthy bad guys are the named characters. If Bob the Stormtrooper confronts the good guys, don't worry. There's also a part where some fruit splatters on the TIE fighter after they destroy a vendor's store. The episode plays this off, but if you actually think about it, they destroyed an innocent dude's store, and who knows whether or not he can afford to resupply under a strict and oppressive empire. I'm probably overthinking it, but I'm thinking back to Krea's words about how actions no matter how small, can have dire consequences. The episode takes Zeb and Ezra flying across Lothal. They conveniently come across Mr. Sumar and friends being hassled by the Empire. Since he refused to sell them his farm, they're essentially going to arrest him and destroy the farm. Yeah, this is another instance of the Empire being evil because they're evil, and Ezra gets Zeb to intervene. This is another instance of the Imperials being stupid as shit. Ezra boards the transport and frees Mr. Sumar and friends, but the Imperials catch on to what's going on. But unfortunately, that's the only competent thing they do. There's literally a moment where one of the stormtroopers doesn't just shoot Ezra, and stops to ask him if he did all of this just to steal some fruit, which obviously gives Ezra time to thwart this guy. Also, 10 to 20 seconds later, Zeb shoots the TIE fighter turret towards Ezra's location, but manages not to kill him, instead taking out all the bad guys. If there was ever a case of blatant plot armor in the show, this would be it. Well, anyways, the climax in this episode results in Ezra and Zeb being friends suddenly, which I don't buy at all. Upon returning to the Ghost, they actually managed to pull a funny visual gag when Ezra and Zeb return to their bunk, and Sabine painted this stupid image of Ezra falling on top of Zeb, and they figure out it was Chopper who unscrewed the bunk bed, and so they chase after the droid as the Ghost takes off. Was the only point of this episode supposed to be that Ezra and Zeb's rivalry would be resolved or something? Regardless, this was a waste of fucking time. Thankfully, after that long detour, we finally get an episode that features the Grand Inquisitor, after he couldn't be bothered to show up for the past few episodes. This episode starts with Ezra getting some training, or lack thereof. Kanan spouts the line that Yoda said in The Empire Strikes Back: "Do or do not. There is no try." And Ezra responds that how can he do something if he doesn't try first? And Kanan responds that now that he thinks about it, that used to confuse him too, but Master Yoda used to say it a lot. I actually kinda like this exchange. You could pass it off as Filoni making fun of iconic dialogue, but one could argue that since Kanan was merely a Padawan when he survived the Purge, he wouldn't be completely up to speed on Jedi philosophy and values. Also, this episode just has Zeb be a straight up dick again. He really just trips Ezra over and cheers Chopper on, as Ezra is tasked with deflecting milk bottles or something. This is meant to show Ezra being unfocused and whatnot. Something I have to ask though, is why are they doing this on top of the ship in mid-flight above the skies of Lothal? Oh wait, I know why. It's so that Chopper could almost kill Ezra by launching milk bottles at him. That causes him to fall off and almost plummet to his death. Kanan, of course, saves him. And basically, we see that the whole setup for this episode is to show that Kanan ain't exactly the best teacher, due to his incomplete Jedi training. For once, we've got a half-decent setup. The Ghost crew look at a HoloNet broadcast, in which the Imperials claim the rebels attacked a transport of innocent workers, and during all this, a hijacked broadcast happens from some senator, who leaks the location of Luminara on Dooley, who is being held captive in a specific system. Kanan figures that Luminara would make an excellent teacher for Ezra, and so they're gonna prop a rescue mission. Something I don't understand is why would they immediately go look for Luminara without some pre-planning? This episode really seems to simplify everything. The reason I said this was a half-decent setup is because the show really dumbs things down. When it comes to getting in, they are, of course, easily able to sneak in due to taking a gamble. The show explains the risk as like, let's hope that the Imperials also thought this was too risky for anyone to try. It felt like they just wanted an excuse for the Ghost crew to make it inside. They don't even stick to said plan. As when Kanan drops in to take out some stormtroopers, Ezra joins in. And aside from a brief scolding, they just proceed in. I also hate this part where Sabine is able to overpower a stormtrooper and throw him off. Anyways, after they've taken out the first round of stormtroopers, they rely on Ezra to use his lockpick or whatever to get into this maximum security prison. And he actually manages to do that. Gee, do these writers really want plot to happen or what? It would have been more believable if Zeb forced the door open. I mean, he does that later in the episode. To further reinforce how the last episode doesn't matter, Zeb smacks Ezra on the head and starts being a straight up douche again. The crew change the plan again when it turns out the schematics are outdated, and Hera is forced to fly away when a bunch of flying creatures show up to bother her. Despite being forced to flee temporarily, she's able to use these animals to wreak havoc against the bad guys later. After clearing out more stormtroopers, they finally make it to Luminara Unduli's cell, and they see her sitting in isolation. But then she magically walks into a coffin, and then the Grand Inquisitor comes in, revealing that Luminara was dead the whole time. Yeah, I just spoiled Psycho, but face it, you had 70 plus years to watch it. Anyways, the Grand Inquisitor reveals that this is all a trap commonly used to draw in surviving Jedi who wanted to do something with the Jedi Master in question. You think this is where the cool stuff is finally going to happen, but it's prevalent here that due to the main character's plot armor, the Grand Inquisitor doesn't try that hard to kill them. Based on how the escape sequence is presented, the Grand Inquisitor is having fun, but he also doesn't try extra hard to murder them. So it's unclear to me what the Grand Inquisitor is trying to do. He openly offers Ezra a path to the dark side, and of course, Ezra rejects it. It doesn't really go anywhere other than that. Evading Vader in Fallen Order was more tense than his shit. I also gotta mention how the Inquisitor's lightsaber is the most gimmicky I've ever seen. It's a spinning double saber. It's weird to me, because why doesn't Darth Vader use a lightsaber like this? Why is it standard issue for Inquisitors, but not the Emperor's main enforcer? I suppose it ain't that big of a deal, but still. Anyways, Ezra and Kanan make up with each other, blah blah, and they practice what they did at the start of the episode. That's episode 5. If you can't already tell, this script is killing me. I've dived so deep into this show, and I'm not even halfway through episode-wise. Let's just get on with it. The next episode takes us to the Imperial Academy. Something I have to ask is why the hell the rebels keep going back to Lothal. We've been there numerous times already, and I'm thinking back to Luke Skywalker's journey, where him leaving Tatooine was a big moment, and he wouldn't return until years later and when he needed to. I'm just saying. Another reason is because we keep getting the same recurring characters since we keep returning to Lothal. Given the lowered budget of the show, it just makes me think whether or not they're just reusing assets and whatnot. It seems incredibly lazy. I wish the Ghost crew would go out and explore the galaxy, instead of going back to the same planet every single fucking time. Well, in this episode, Ezra poses as a cadet in the Imperial Academy, doing a bunch of parkour flips and shit. Despite the fact that he's supposed to get a decoder that he's supposed to send to Kanan and Hera so they can stop a shipment, Ezra decides to make friends at the Academy. It's only convenient, though, that 2 of his colleagues in the Academy are unloyal to the Empire. To further prove my point about reusing characters, Agent Kallus makes several appearances. Something I have to wonder, isn't the Imperial Security Bureau on Coruscant or whatever? Why does Kallus just stick around on Lothal? Another cadet named Zare helps Ezra with his mission, because apparently his sister joined the Academy and went missing, and he suspects the Empire did something to her. On top of this, another cadet named Jai Kell joins in, and despite being shown to have nothing against the Empire, he's easily convinced by Ezra and Zare to join them. The logic they use is that Jai lives alone with his mother, and they tempt him by saying, "What if you never saw your mother again?" Which to me is absolutely irrelevant to anything in relation to all this. None of the characters at that seem all that concerned about betraying the Empire, which further emphasizes how unintimidating the Empire is. With all that being said, Ezra delivers the decoder and manages to escape with Jai, although Zare stays behind and pretends to be loyal, in which at the end he's questioned by the Grand Inquisitor. Kel, because he betrayed the Empire, remarks about how he and his mother will have to go into hiding, which further emphasizes how stupid it was to betray the Empire. That's all because it took minimal convincing, and thus, that's the episode. I don't see the point in these episodes. All that happened here that might progress the plot is the Grand Inquisitor pursuing the Ghost crew. It seems that the show follows the same formula with rebels do a job on a supply run or whatever, the Empire fucks around somehow, and the rebels resolve everything. It's around here that I'm starting to notice a pattern in these repetitive episodes. I didn't have much to say about episode 6, so let's just move on with episode 7. This episode, titled Out of Darkness, seems to have only one purpose, and that's name-dropping a rebel agent named Fulcrum, who gives out jobs to the Ghost Crew. Out of all the episodes in Season 1, this may be one of the most forgettable in the whole series. The episode has Hera, Ezra, and Sabine on another supply run, and by this point, I'm getting sick of hearing that. On top of that, they're being chased by some dreaded TIE fighters, which of course, Hera brags about how none of them can come close to touching her ship. The first third of the episode is a complete waste of time. It's full of "Do we trust Fulcrum?" from Sabine, as well as Ezra, Zeb, and Chopper repairing something on the ship, which has nothing to do with anything. This is toppled with more arguing between Ezra and Zeb. And again, what was the point of watching the fruit collecting episode? If I had to sum up what happens in this episode, Hera and Sabine get stranded on some planet and have to fend off the native fauna until help arrives. That's the plot. It's a completely useless story. I don't really want to complain about filler on a constant basis, but I can't help it. I thought The Bad Batch had an overload of filler, but this show is giving that a run for its money. Anyhow, that's the episode. I have next to nothing to say about it. Now let's talk about episode 8, titled Empire Day, which is about the titular in-universe holiday. The episode starts with more training, which at this point, I haven't noticed any progression. Not even one tiny step forward. As always, they're on Lothal. Again. Being wanted fugitives seems to have zero impact on the show. They've committed God knows how many crimes against the Empire, and they're only recognized by the named bad guys. Anyways, the common overarching gimmick for this episode is Empire Day. It's a super hammed-in holiday, in which everyone must intensely celebrate or be arrested. Basically, on the Star Wars version of cable television, some government commercial plays in a bar, in which it announces it was the 15th anniversary of the Galactic Empire's formation, in which they brought stability and order to the galaxy by ending the Clone Wars yada yada. You'll notice that most of everyone just puts up with the Empire's rule, and doesn't actually like it. This is one extremely unfanatical population the Empire controls. This show has this really simplistic idea that anyone in the military are the only real ones who support the Empire, and the average everyday citizen are just tolerating it and getting on with their lives. It's been 15 years, and the Galactic Empire has an iron grip on propaganda and the HoloNet. The way this is presented, this all feels like a stage play or something with actors, because the universe seriously cannot actually function like this. A small detail I liked is showing Emperor Palpatine in the broadcast in his non-deformed state. That was a nice touch. Anyways, there's just the same repetitive kindergarten oppression with some TIE fighter pilots trying to search for a Rodian named Zebo, whom Ezra recognizes. He actually shows some seriousness for once, as he wishes to be alone and contemplate on things. This is where we get a taste of Ezra's backstory, and for once I'm like, finally! We're finally getting something of substance. It was previously established that Ezra has been a loner for the longest time, and in this episode, we learn why that is. But before that, we get an Empire Day festival, in which they play a celebratory version of the Imperial March, which completely takes me out of the episode. I know it might be a bit unfair because the Old Republic theme also played as orchestral music in KOTOR, but this is just a big pet peeve of mine. The same thing happened in Solo: A Star Wars Story, and it confirms that the Imperial March is actually in universe music too. You know what, forget about it, no criticism here. But with what I described, the minister does a grand announcement, showcasing new military hardware. We've also got Fatty pressuring the citizens into cheering for the Empire. Anyways, they proceed to show an advanced Imperial TIE fighter, and Hera and Kanan, as smug as ever, comment about how they almost feel bad for trying to blow it up. Anyways, the rebels cause a distraction, and Kanan sets charges on the TIE fighter. And when he's caught by a stormtrooper for being out of bounds, Ezra proceeds to bail him out, pretending to be his son or whatever. Ugh, this is pathetic. And the stormtrooper buys this. It probably wouldn't be such a big problem if all the stormtroopers weren't stupid. Also, Freddie Prinze in this scene puts on the most insincere, exaggerated enthusiasm ever. It's cartoonishly over the top, which further just takes me out of the story and play. Anyways, they blow this shit up and cause chaos. And since they've done this shit so many times, I'm wondering what the hell's so different about this. During the chaos, Zeb gets a clear shot at Agent Kallus, but Kanan distracts him, telling him to shoot the Grand Inquisitor instead. And Zeb complies for some reason, and no joke, misses his shot at the Grand Inquisitor. Plot armor up the arse. Also, Kanan's run cycle here is poorly and unnaturally animated, as it feels like he's supposed to be running forward, but is going diagonally. It's almost as bad as Fallout 3 in New Vegas. Anyways, during the ensuing chaos, Ezra, Kanan, and Sabine hide in what turns out to be Ezra's old home, where his parents used to raise him. It's also here where they find Zebo, the Rodian the Empire is looking for. Ezra explains that his parents were anti-imperial broadcasters who were talking shit about the Empire, and were one day arrested, leaving him alone. Zebo has that head thing Lobot had in The Empire Strikes Back, and he's storing vital intel about the shit the Empire's building. While Sabine is trying to decode Zebo, he reveals that it's Ezra's birthday. Yeah, Ezra was born the same day the Empire rose, so he was born 2 days before Luke and Leia. This seems like a massive coincidence. We also get a brief cameo of a data disk, resembling the one from Dark Forces 2, given Jarek himself was an Inquisitor. It feels like Filoni's just stealing ideas from other, better creators. So now, they've got to get Zebo out of Lothal. Anyways, they steal a troop transport, and proceed to ram their transport straight through a blocked exit with the Imperials waiting. After a delay of telling the transport to stop, which at this point, you might as well start shooting, Skinny gives the order to fire. And despite all the forces firing straight at the transport manages to resist the blaster fire because plot armor, and ram through the blocked exit, and keep going with minimum speed lost, further selling the point that the Empire is useless. Agent Kallus eventually has to call in the Grand Inquisitor to help, and during the chase sequence, there's a rare instance of one of the bad guys putting up a decent fight, although he's pushed off the transport. But hey, he was one of the few competent stormtroopers. The only other person who fights decently is Agent Kallus, but that's only because he's got plot armor. After failing again, it's up to the Grand Inquisitor and his TIE squadron to pursue the Ghost. There's actually a part where Chopper gets deactivated from cannon fire, and that actually made me smile, which I think was not how I was supposed to feel. Then of course, we've got the crappiest cliffhanger ever, in which Ezra conveniently gets Zebo out of his robotic state, and he's back to normal. And he tells Ezra he knows what happened to his parents. And Sabine translating what he said is literally the last line of the episode. Boo! That was pathetic. Everyone at this point can piece together what happened to Ezra's parents at this point. They were taken away by the Empire. And wouldn't you know it, this is actually an episode with a second part since the pilot. Unfortunate that we had to suffer through 3 filler episodes in a row. Also, something I wanted to talk about is how Rebels has no main theme at the start of an episode, except for a really short music cue. Yet another downgrade from the Clone Wars. Let's get on with the next episode. For once, we pick up where we left off, with the Empire still pursuing the Ghost. Ezra questions Zebo on what happened to his parents, and hey, we actually get a solid moment where Zebo expresses regret that he was too afraid to raise Ezra after his parents were taken away, and wishing for forgiveness, before reverting back to his robotic state, and Ezra's fucking pissed, proclaiming how he failed his parents and failed him, and they actually sold it as a genuine moment, a rarity in the show so far. Ezra is then called to the cockpit, and is ordered by Hera to fix the nav computer, as Star Destroyers are inbound, then cue another inappropriate opening credits. Although as soon as we get past that, the episode actually manages to pick up momentum, if I'm being honest. Not without its bumps of course, but still, Hera finds out through Zebo that the Empire is tracking their ship. However, the tracking beacon was shot at a detachable part of the ship, so Hera orders Kanan and Ezra to lure the Empire away. Sabine points out how dangerous it is to detach from hyperspace, and I agree. I'm gonna be lenient since this was the start of a new canon, and so Rebels can sort of afford to create some of the rules of the unspecified stuff of the Star Wars universe, but still, I'm gonna question this. How the hell does this work? Isn't hyperspace another dimension or something? What essentially happens is that Kanan detaches the smaller ship and it struggles to get out of hyperspace and almost burns. But he manages to get the ship stable and heads towards the deserted Republic base from that filler episode. Oh, is that why they had that episode? That's so lazy. But regardless, with all those bumps out of the way, the episode actually manages to breathe some fucking life. Kanan gets Ezra to try and use beast control on the wildlife seen in the filler episode while he destroys the tracking beacon. And we actually get this tense moment where Ezra is struggling and realizes what's wrong and forgives Zebo from across the stars. And this is where Zebo goes back to his old self again. Upon doing so, he tells Hera to tell Ezra something important about what happened to his parents. Then, of course, elsewhere, the Grand Inquisitor lands at the base, but by the time he and the accompanying Stormtrooper Legion spot Ezra and Kanan, they've assembled the loyalty of all the wild animals. While the troopers are having a hard time fending off the animals, the Grand Inquisitor slices through them unscathed, and we get a decent moment where they actually struggle to fend off the Grand Inquisitor, and for the first time it feels real. Ezra, through raw strength and willpower, summons a giant flying animal to attack the Grand Inquisitor, before Ezra collapses. Kanan picks him up, retrieves his lightsaber that the Grand Inquisitor drops somewhat conveniently admittingly, but still, I thought the episode was actually pretty decent throughout all of this. It's here where Ezra is distraught and wants some time alone, so Hera isn't able to tell him what Zebo wanted him to hear right away. Although Sabine comes in and shows Ezra what the disc had in it, and it's a picture of young Ezra and his parents, and that's the episode. Something I noticed is that this episode wasn't quipping jokes every 2 seconds. In fact, this episode plays everything serious and tried to have stakes, so it actually managed to be a decent little episode. I fully expect Ezra's quote-unquote character development to go nowhere, but still, I applaud a side story that wasn't a waste of time. I wish the episodes were more like this. Anyways, let's get on with the next episode. And by this point, I was starting to think there was a sign of hope. Kanan gets Ezra to use the Force to locate a Jedi site on Lothal. What? Why the hell is there everything convenient on Lothal? Did the writers really not want to change planets? Whatever. Ezra figures out a way to get the site open, and it's here where you realize, oh yeah, it's going to be one of those episodes with force trials and illusions and stuff. It's hard to fuck this up unless you're the sequel trilogy, but putting that aside, Kanan and Ezra observe how some masters waited for their Padawans to return, but never did, so they decayed and died. I'm probably missing something wrong with this episode, but for once, the series started to breathe some fucking light, as Ezra goes further in and encounters visions that decently represent his self-doubt. The ambience is pretty good, and I'm noticing that the show is actually being good when it's tackling something serious. In the past few episodes, they've been quipping jokes or having episodes on stuff to waste your time like collecting fruit. Here, by being serious and important, the show can actually do things efficiently. Ezra, as he enters, comes across illusions of multiple things. Kanan and the Grand Inquisitor as an illusion show up, and as well as this, Ezra also hears the rest of the Ghost crew talking smack about him, only for those illusions to be killed by the Grand Inquisitor. The episode convincingly presents Ezra's distress, and managing to overcome what is essentially his first trial, as the Grand Inquisitor slashes at him, and is completely unfazed. The moment this happens, Master Yoda comes from across the galaxy and contacts both Kanan and Ezra. Ezra finally has a light to guide him, and even Kanan gets his moment with him discussing with Yoda his own doubts. It's not explicitly said, but Kanan was a Padawan when surviving Order 66. I'm thankful that this wasn't spelled out to you. It's definitively confirmed in stories like Kanan the Last Padawan, which the Sad Batch retconned, but I also like this exchange where Ezra talks to Yoda about how the Ghost crew help others, and before then, he was a loner looking out for only himself. As such, he is rewarded with a blue crystal. So in Disney canon, starting with the show I presume, they decided to call them Kyber crystals, ripping the name straight from Splinter of the Mind's Eye. I just finished transcripting that novel for my fan-made audiobook, and I don't like this change. Filoni's just taking names instead of coming up with his own. At every turn, they seem to derive heavily off of the expanded universe, despite claiming they wanted quote-unquote maximum creative freedom. That argument has aged like milk, because look at what they've done just over 10 years later. The Kyber Crystal and Splinter of the Mind's Eye was sort of an artifact that Force sensitives could tap into and whatnot. I suppose that's a similarity the Kyber Crystals and Disney canon share, as users bond with the crystal. I suppose this change doesn't break film-only George Lucas canon as far as I can tell, so it's a change they could get away with when rebooting the timeline. It doesn't break any film canon rules is what I'm saying. I thought the idea of the Sith making their crystals bleed was a solid one. It's one way of making the Sith look evil, by having them dominate their lightsaber crystals. Anyways, Ezra is able to return to Kanan with his crystal, and the episode wraps up with Ezra constructing his own lightsaber, which is perhaps the most gimmicky lightsaber I've seen until Kylo Ren's and then some. It was specifically designed to double as a lightsaber and a blaster, and that's why it made the perfect plastic toy for money to milk the wallets of parents unfortunate enough to have kids who like this crap. And that's the episode. I suppose I didn't have much to say about it, but hey, it did its job well. But say goodbye to any momentum in the story, and say hello to another filler episode. A filler episode that starts in the stupidest way possible. Zeb and Lando Calrissian of all characters are playing Sabacc, and Zeb, because he's a total buffoon, bets Chopper when he's losing the game. He thinks he's got an easy victory with one of the most powerful cards, until Lando reveals that he's got the Idiot's Array, which, in case you don't know, is the most powerful card in Sabacc. I'd probably be more forgiving of the fan service if the show didn't come across as cookie-cutter fan service galore. As always, Billy D. Williams reprised his role as Lando Calrissian, because he's really cool, even though his guest appearance in something like Jedi Outcast was better utilized. For one thing, his guest appearance wasn't filler, as Jedi Outcast had Lando in that game reveal vital information for tracking down Desan, and right afterwards, we go to Cloud City, which was essential to the plot. Here, not so much. The episode is literally Lando being a general annoyance. Everyone except maybe Sabine hates him, and that's only because Lando complimented her artwork and recognized her inspiration. I may be reading too deep into it, but Ezra, who has a thing for Sabine, is really annoyed at Lando, and acts like the quote-unquote nice guy around Sabine. Like a lot of gutless simps are. I don't know. It was just annoying seeing Ezra being a nice guy around Sabine. And the cartoon regular show did this kind of stuff better with Mordecai. Lando is just a nuisance for the main characters, as he sells Hera to some slimy crime lord as part of an unspecified plan. He's also got a puffer pig, which is exactly what it sounds like. And we got Ezra trying to climb over it. Overall, this episode was a whole load of nothing. I'm sick of the common trope of the Ghost Crew doing petty, stupid jobs that might pinch the Empire and not much more. Well, things actually start to go somewhere, it seems. I totally expected filler episodes along the way, but still. Anyways, the episode starts with some deflection training. Why does it feel like we've already seen this before? Wasn't this pretty much in the episode with the Grand Inquisitor and the deceased Luminara Unduli? Why are we getting this again? While at least they're not doing it while flying, where Ezra could have easily fallen off and splat on the ground to his death. Just like the Clone Wars episode with Ahsoka receiving a vision of Padme being shot, this episode has Ezra receive a vision of meeting and escorting Gal Travis, the senator in exile who leaked information concerning Luminara Unduli being alive. He speaks through code to meet the rebels on Lothal, and the rebels figure out that he's going to meet them at an Old Republic Senate building, now abandoned by the Empire. Ezra goes into town to meet with Zare, and for some reason, he brought his painted helmet with him. Zare talks briefly about how he's been promoted and being shipped off-world, blah blah, but of course the Imperials spot Ezra with his painted helmet and start chasing after him. So Ezra brought his painted helmet for that reason? What lazy writing. And Ezra even remembers this part from his vision. Even though this is the part where the show would cut away for commercials on Disney XD, Ezra is easily able to escape. So that was one crappy cliffhanger if I've ever seen one. Anyways, the next day, the crew go to the Senate building, in which the Imperials are patrolling, because Zare stated earlier that they've got an operation going down there. As such, they easily sneak in, and it's like we're playing on the piss easy difficulty at this point. because the rebels just find everything too easy. Then, of course, they also find Senator Travis way too easily until the Imperials show up. Agent Kallus, of course, hesitates on firing at them because he wants to know where Zeb and Sabine are instead of just wiping out most of the crew on the spot. I'm getting super annoyed at this point that the Empire doesn't know better at this point, because Zeb and Sabine ambush from above, and the Imperials are such bad shots, it's embarrassing to watch. The escape ride the Senator came in is missing, and as well as that, the Senator acts really strange. And one chase in the sewers later in which they split up, Hera and Ezra find out the hard way that Senator Travis is working with the Empire. Gee, the hints in the show are way too obvious, so I was not surprised at this twist villain in the slightest. The twist also doesn't have any real meaning, besides another trap that the rebels have to overcome. The reason I say that is because beyond explaining the previous traps like Luminara Unduli, it doesn't give some big revelation. And hey, what do you know? Turns out that Travis's gun isn't even properly charged, so he's unable to execute Ezra and Hera on the spot. Oops, that's an extremely convenient oopsie. Also, why the hell did the Senator not just try to shoot them instead of revealing he was a spy before trying to shoot them? This is so poorly written. Also, something I don't get is when Hera knocks the Senator out, they don't execute him for his treachery. Kanan even says, quote, "We'll leave him here." What the hell? Why? Why not just kill him on the spot? This is ridiculous. Kallus and his troopers show up, and Kanan uses the Force to slow down the large fan or whatever, and they easily escape. Again. They meet up with Chopper, whom the Imperials thought was an Imperial droid for some reason, and they escape. There's some wrapping up and blah blah, and that's the episode. Underwhelming, but fortunately, we're getting at the shit that concludes the season. We've still got 3 bloody episodes left, but still. Anyways, with that being said, let's get on with the next episode. We get another guest appearance from the original trilogy, but this time, it actually makes sense. Grand Moff Tarkin, who is annoyed as hell, as the Imperials on Lothal have been ineffective at capturing the Ghost Crew. That's how Tarkin comes off. He scolds everyone present. The Minister, Agent Kallus, and the Grand Inquisitor are all talked down to by the Grand Moff. The way Tarkin talks is exactly like he's criticizing the show in-universe for having useless villains. Like seriously, what a way to take me out of the story. The fact that Tarkin even talks down to the Grand Inquisitor is fucking laughable. The Inquisitor thus far was built up as the greatest threat, and even he has been utterly useless, not getting a scratch on the rebels. Will Tarkin be any more competent? I hope so. Doing a legacy character dirty would be a mistake. Anyways, we cut to the rebels evading the stormtroopers elsewhere, with Skinny and Fatty pursuing them. Unsurprisingly, the rebels have an easy time taking them out. They return to the Ghost to see Senator Travis is spinning the rebels in a negative light, and that he was protesting peacefully against the Empire. Blah blah. Yeah, that's another reason you should have executed him. So Tarkin has a little meeting with all the bad guys we've been introduced to so far. So what does Tarkin do? Why, it's my most hated Star Wars trope, of course. He has the Grand Inquisitor cut off Fatty and Skinny's heads.
And it's gone.
And tells the Minister and Kallus that from now on, failure will have consequences. And like the time Kallus kicked a stormtrooper off, it's not done well. I suppose the presentation of the scene is decent, but this is another instance of "you failed me so you die" reasoning. Aside from inspiring fear in those spared, which may either encourage the lackeys to try harder, or panic too much and cause them to screw up anyways, Tarkin and the Empire doesn't get anything out of killing these two. There really is no better example than Revenge of the Sith or Tales of the Jedi as far as I've seen, because killing incompetent commanders for failure in a straight up execution doesn't get you anywhere. Tarkin could at least send them off to a labor camp or something where they get something right. That's why I hate this trope, and why Empire Strikes Back annoyed the hell out of me, being the most bothersome thing Vader did in that movie. Empire Strikes Back made a lot of things popular. The villain kills his own men cliché was perhaps the worst. Even Knights of the Old Republic did this, and it bugs the hell out of me too. Anyways, with that being said, Ezra and the others have a plan to hijack an Imperial radio tower to send their own little message to the people of Lothal and local system. They take out a probe droid with Ezra summoning an animal to attack it, and they easily make it past the bad guys. and hijack the radio tower. Sabine, despite given minimum time by her own admission, is able to slice into the system before finally having to flee. Kanan, of course, stays behind to lead the escape of everyone else and is captured by the Empire. This is literally only done so that Tarkin doesn't execute them. It's plot armor 101, and it's not earned in the slightest. Kanan just decides to stick around to be captured by the Empire. Anyways, back on the Ghost, Ezra does his inspirational speech. It's not inspiring in the slightest, and I swear I've heard this speech a million times before. He basically says the cliche, "We're not criminals, we're rebels. And don't you see what the Empire's done to your lives and your freedom? It's time to stand up and fight back." I almost cringed hearing that speech. I heard Jason Clarke give a better speech in Terminator Genesis, and he was gravely miscast as John Connor. Also, I want to mention that the Imperials decided to destroy their own communications tower just because some rebels put up a broadcast encouraging citizens to fight against the Empire. Earlier, Tarkin was complaining about how the rebels were destroying stuff, but now the Empire are the one destroying their own assets. In other words, they became the very thing they swore to destroy. Anyways, that's the episode, and the rebels have to get Kanan back, and I didn't find myself caring. This is just a quota to fulfill so the plot could happen how Filoni and friends wanted. In the next episode, even with the absence of Kanan, the Ghost crew make a complete mockery out of the Empire. They hijack the AT-ST, and it's shown that they intend to collect intel on Kanan's whereabouts. But after this little mission, the mysterious Fulcrum convinces Hera that finding Kanan isn't worth it. And despite being the most optimistic character in this show, she has completely lost hope in finding Kanan. Also remember that they're fucking lovers too. So it baffles me on why she's against saving Kanan beyond Fulcrum telling her not to. It seems really out of character is what I'm saying. Ezra is in fact the one who wants to rescue Kanan, and Hera orders him not to. But the disobedient Ezra says he's gonna stick out for Kanan, and apparently everyone but Hera are right on board with them. This is perhaps the only likable thing Chopper in particular does. Yeah. So Chopper distracts Hera, while the others detach the ship and go to Vizago's hideout. Wait, how did they find Vizago so easily? He was missing for the entire season since episode 4 and now he's back? At the same location he was spotted? Is Vizago just stupid? For someone who overly cares about business and not getting caught by the Empire, he sure is asking to die. Anyways, Ezra is forced to owe Vizago a favor in return for the intel that will get Kanan back. I presume this is set up for a future episode, but at least they're not wasting our time now with a side quest. Hera finds them instantly, I presume because there's a tracker on the other ship or something. Who knows? Who cares, honestly? Point is, Hera is upset with Ezra, but goes along with his plan anyways. The intel Vizago provided hinted that an Imperial droid would be able to get onto the Imperial ship and slice the database. So they literally just paint Chopper and have him board an Imperial shuttle, download some intel, and then retrieve the droid after attacking the Imperials. That's the episode. I skipped over the Kanan interrogation stuff, and to be honest, the whole episode is kind of a sideshow to the main event, but at least it's not straight up filler, so there's that. Now it's time for the season 1 finale. The episode starts with the rebels embarrassing the Imperials again. I'd say it makes the Empire look like a joke, but you already know that, so I'd just be spouting useless information. Anyways, they track Kanan to the Mustafar system. They bring along a TIE fighter that Sabine painted, and they easily get access to the Star Destroyer by submitting clearance code. Again, are things made super easy for the good guys. It's getting old. They also explain that they don't actually see the paint until it's in the hangar. Well, anyways, the stormtroopers sent to inspect the TIE fighter are just as clueless as ever. One of them even compliments the paint job. Then, of course, the TIE fighter detonates disruptors and knocks everyone out, with Ezra and friends sneaking on board. When the Grand Inquisitor realizes the rebels have boarded the ship, he just leaves Kanan in his cell and goes somewhere else. Then, of course, Ezra frees Kanan after locating his cell. And oh! This is why you had the Grand Inquisitor leave Kanan's cell. It's so you could have this conclusive duel. The Grand Inquisitor, of course, takes both Kanan and Ezra head on. One detail that I like is that Ezra and Kanan use each other's lightsabers. The fight is largely unsatisfying, and they even have this fake out death for Ezra. But come on, are they really gonna kill off the main character in season 1? Kanan takes this fake out loss as a reason to stand up, embrace the way of the Jedi, and take out the Grand Inquisitor. Kanan literally destroys the Grand Inquisitor's lightsaber from the inside, and despite the dude given plenty of time for even a normal guy to react, he doesn't, and his lightsaber is destroyed. Then, bafflingly, the Grand Inquisitor is at Kanan's mercy, and the Grand Inquisitor has some choice words, and then he falls to his death.
And it's gone.
What the fuck? Did they just kill a higher tier boss at the end of the first season? It is nice to know that named characters can die in the first season of this show, but still, if there was ever a character they killed too early, it's the Grand Inquisitor. I mistakenly thought before I saw this episode that the Grand Inquisitor died at the end of season 2, which if that was the case, that also would have been too early. But they killed him here? Since this guy was the Grand Inquisitor, they're gonna have to come up with something pretty fucking incredible to top him, because we know Tarkin can't die. I'm just saying that they build him up as a major antagonist, and then he dies like a little bitch too early? Ugh! Anyways, the Ghost Crew escapes with the help of a small fleet of rebel ships, and to my surprise, they actually managed to have a decent setup for the next season. It's finally revealed who Fulcrum is, and who else would it be but Ahsoka Tano, Filoni's fetish Mary Sue. Yeah, she's a pivotal rebel leader, literally overtaking Starkiller almost. When I saw her make her appearance, I was like,
Seriously?
but hey, the show actually provides a hook for the next season, even if it's something I don't like. On top of that, Tarkin and Callus discuss how civilians are in uproar, and we finally get the reveal of Darth fucking Vader. Okay, I know I said I wanted them to gradually increase the threat level each season, but this is straight up overkill. Hypothetically, if they're building up to a finale, then who would we get after Darth Vader if there's 4 seasons? You could have the Emperor in season 3, but what about after that? This feels like a show they went into without a plan. Whether that's the case is a different story. So conclusion, this show so far is extremely underwhelming. I ripped on the Clone Wars enough after I realized I don't like it in hindsight, but Rebels, although unsurprising, is worse than the Clone Wars. But hey, at least I didn't criticize the show for continuity errors, at least not yet. I know you guys want me to talk about a certain someone, but please be patient. I'm going to give Rebels Season 1 a pie out of 10. A dumbed down parody of Star Wars, with cringe-ass moments that don't move the series forward. The antagonists are worthless and weak, and it's a wonder why they have an iron grip on the galaxy. It certainly doesn't feel like it. This script is proving to be damn long, so I'll just wrap things up here. Rebels Season 1 is a rocky foundation for a new canon, and it shows Dave Filoni's true talent, or lack thereof. I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain. Were you praying at the